I was taping down the edges of a sample kit for a new client in Wilmington, making sure the industrial gaskets were nested tight so they wouldn't shift during transit. It was a tedious process. I'm usually the one packing these because I'm the one who has to deal with the phone calls when a client's order arrives in a heap of plastic wrap. I had the shipping labels printed and the boxes stacked, but I was lagging behind on my quarterly projections. That was when Hector had stepped in. 2 weeks ago, he'd seen me staring at my screen with that look he calls my spreadsheet trance. He'd leaned over, kissed the top of my head, and told me to leave the logistics to him. He's a veteran services coordinator, and he's always proud of how he manages the transport and scheduling for his clients. "You're drowning in those reports, Liz," he'd said. "Just give me the addresses and the tracking numbers. I'll handle the dispatch. Take it off your plate." I'd felt a genuine wave of relief. I've spent 20 years as the primary engine of our household, the one who remembers when the HVAC filter needs changing and which insurance policy is about to lapse. And having him offer to take a professional burden was a luxury. I believed him. I trusted that he'd apply the same coordination skills to my gaskets that he did to his veterans' benefits cases. The relief lasted until Tuesday afternoon when a notification popped up on my monitor. It was a delivery exception alert from the courier. I clicked it, and my stomach did a slow, heavy roll. The shipment for the Wilmington client had been sitting in a warehouse in Dover for 4 days. The reason was a simple typo in the zip code. A digit swapped. But because the kit contained temperature-sensitive adhesives, it had been moved to a climate-controlled holding area. There was a $65 storage and rerouting fee tacked onto the account. I didn't call Hector right then. I spent my lunch hour on hold with the courier, listening to a distorted version of some elevator jazz that sounded like it was being played through a tin can. I spent 40 minutes navigating a phone tree just to reach a human who could tell me that the package was essentially hostage until the fee was paid. I used the company card to settle the balance, knowing I'd have to write a clumsy explanation to accounting about why a routine shipment suddenly cost an extra $65. By the time the representative confirmed the kit would arrive by Thursday morning, my head was throbbing. I had spent my only hour of peace doing a job that had been handled. The drive home to Rehoboth Beach was a slog. The July humidity was oppressive, the kind of thick, salty air that clings to your skin the second you step outside. I hit the usual bottleneck of traffic near the elementary school by our duplex, where parents were idling in the street, waiting for kids to finish summer programs. I sat there in the air conditioning, watching a seagull pick at a discarded sandwich bag, and I started thinking about the plate Hector had mentioned. I wondered how much of my life was just me cleaning up the edges of things he thought he had under control. I handled the property tax reminders, the duplex lease renewals, the scheduling for the plumber. I'd always told myself it was fine because his job was more emotionally taxing, that his mental bandwidth was used up by the crises his clients faced. I'd spent years telling myself he was a big picture guy, which was just my way of ignoring the fact that I did all the actual work. When I finally pulled into the driveway, I fumbled with the garage remote. It's an old, clunky plastic thing with a button that sticks if you don't press it exactly in the center. I clicked it 3 times, holding it at a weird angle toward the sensor, cursing under my breath until the door finally groaned open. Hector was in the living room when I walked in. He was leaned back in his favorite chair, a glass of iced tea in his hand, looking entirely untroubled. He looked like a man who had successfully managed his day and was now enjoying the reward. "Hey," he said, not moving from the chair. "How was the day? Get those projections finished?" I dropped my bag on the entry table with a thud that was probably a bit too loud. "Mostly. I spent my lunch break fixing the Wilmington shipment." He blinked, looking genuinely confused. "Fixing it? What do you mean?" "I told you I had that covered. You had it sitting in a warehouse in Dover for 4 days, Hector," I said. I tried to keep my voice level, but there was a sharp edge to it that I couldn't quite smooth over. There was a typo in the zip code. I had to pay a $65 late fee just to get them to move it. He shifted in the chair, finally setting the tea down. "Dover? That doesn't sound right." I remember entering it. Maybe the courier messed it up on their end. The courier has a digital log of the entry, Hector. It was a typo. Well, $65 isn't the end of the world, he said, his voice taking on that dismissive, soothing tone he used when he wanted to move past a conversation. It's a business expense. Why are you so stressed about it? I looked at the garage remote, still clutched in my hand, the cheap plastic warm from the sun. I wanted to tell him that it wasn't about the $65, but about the fact that I had to spend my only break of the day fixing a mistake he'd promised I wouldn't have to worry about. I wanted to tell him that I was tired of being the only one who knew where the gaps were. Instead, I let out a short, dry laugh. Right, because I just love spending my lunch hour on hold with a shipping clerk in Dover. I'm a regular glutton for punishment. See, you're making it a thing, he said, leaning back again. It was one package. I didn't answer. I just walked into the kitchen and started looking for a glass, feeling the familiar, quiet weight of the labor I was still absorbing. Thursday morning arrived with a coastal storm warning that had the local news anchors talking about potential flooding in the low-lying areas of Rehoboth. The air was thick enough to chew, and I spent my first hour at the office double-checking the delivery confirmation for the Wilmington kit. It had arrived at 8:15 a.m. At 10:30, my phone rang. It was Sarah, the procurement manager for the client. Lisa, I just wanted to call and say thank you, she said, her voice bright. I know that Dover mix-up was a headache, but I really appreciate Hector stepping in to resolve it so quickly. It's rare to see that kind of personal attention to detail these days. He really saved the timeline for us. I sat frozen for a second, my fingers still resting on the mute button. I hadn't told Sarah that Hector had been involved. I just told her the package was on its way. I realized then that Hector must have sent a follow-up email after I'd settled the fee, probably from his home computer, closing the loop in a way that made him the hero of the story. Oh, he's a regular miracle worker, I said, my voice flat and biting. I'm just the girl who handles the invoices. I'll be sure to tell him you're impressed with his coordination. Sarah didn't pick up on the tone. She just thanked me again and hung up. I stared at my monitor, feeling a hot, prickling sensation behind my eyes. It wasn't just that he took the credit. It was how easily he'd stolen the win. He hadn't just failed to do the work. He had successfully rebranded my cleanup as his own initiative. When I got home that evening, the storm hadn't hit yet, but the sky had turned a dark, heavy purple. Hector was in the kitchen, sorting through a stack of mail. He looked up and smiled, that easy, confident expression that usually made me feel safe, but now felt like a provocation. Sarah called me, he said. She was thrilled the kit arrived. I told her we had it all under control. I'm sure you did, I said. I didn't look at him. I walked over to the mail pile and started sorting through it myself. My movements jerky. I'm glad my lunch break provided such a great opportunity for you to look like a professional. He sighed, looking at me like I was speaking a language he didn't care to learn. Liz, why are you still on this? The package is there, the client is happy. That's the goal, isn't it? The goal is for the person doing the work to be the one getting the thank you note, I snapped. But then I stopped. I knew that if I just kept complaining, I was staying in the same loop. I decided right then that if he wanted to be the coordinator, I would let him see exactly what coordination looked like. I decided to push it. I didn't just want the credit. I wanted to strip away the invisible safety net I'd been providing for a decade. For the next 3 days, I stopped doing everything that wasn't explicitly my job. I stopped reminding him about the duplex's shared lawn care schedule with the neighbor, Mr. Henderson. I stopped pre-sorting the bills. I even stopped putting his work clothes in the dryer when the timer went off. I told myself I was setting a boundary, but in reality, I was trying to engineer a failure. I wanted him to fail, really fail, so he'd finally see how much I actually do around here. By Saturday, the experiment was taking a toll on me. The house felt chaotic. The laundry was sitting damp in the washer, smelling like old pennies. Mr. Henderson had knocked on the door twice to ask why the hedge trimmer rental hadn't been confirmed for Monday. I stood in the kitchen, watching Hector look for his favorite blue folder, which I had left exactly where he'd dropped it, on the floor of the mudroom, instead of putting it in his briefcase. Have you seen my folder? He asked, sounding genuinely stressed. I have a meeting with a vet's advocate on Monday, and I can't find the case notes. It's where you left it, I said, not looking up from my tablet. I checked the table, he muttered. Check the floor, I replied. While he was hunting for the folder, I decided to do one last sweep of the shared email account we used for the duplex and a few joint business contacts. I was looking for more corrections I needed to make. That's when I found the thread with Sarah from Wilmington. There was an email from Hector sent on Wednesday afternoon, after I had already fixed the shipping error. He hadn't just told her it was handled. He had offered her a concession to make up for the inconvenience. Hector had decided to give the Wilmington client a 10% discount on their next 3 orders. And he hadn't said a word to me. My stomach dropped. A 10% discount on a high-volume account wasn't just a courtesy. It was a hit to my quarterly margins. It was a decision that affected my performance review and my commission. He'd played the big shot, using my commission to buy himself some favor. I walked into the mudroom and found him crouching on the floor, clutching the blue folder. He looked up at me, and for the first time he looked a little rattled. Found it, he said. Listen, about the laundry. I'll get to it. I just have a lot on my mind with this case. I looked at him and the sarcasm was gone. I just felt tired. I held the tablet in front of him, the screen glowing with the email thread. I didn't say anything for a long minute, just waited for him to read the words. I watched his eyes move across the screen, watching for the moment he'd try to explain it away. 10%, I said, my voice sounding thin, for the next 3 orders. Hector, that's a high-volume account. That's a direct hit to my commission. My boss doesn't just see a generous gesture, she sees a drop in the margin. He stood up from the mudroom floor, dusting off his slacks. He didn't look at the tablet again. It was a courtesy, Lisa. They had a bad experience with the shipping. Which, by the way, I helped resolve. It's called relationship management. It's how you keep a client from jumping ship the second a competitor offers a lower price. You don't manage my relationships, I said. And you definitely don't manage my money. You're being dramatic, he said, stepping past me into the kitchen. It's a few $100s in the long run. I'll make it up to you. I'll take over the grocery shopping for a month or something. I stayed in the mudroom, leaning against the wall. The offer to do the grocery shopping felt like a joke, a tiny payment for a debt he didn't even understand. He thought he was offering me a favor, not realizing that the favor was just a fraction of the labor I already performed without a thank you. The doorbell rang, a sharp, insistent sound that echoed through the duplex. I didn't move. I heard Hector's heavy footsteps heading toward the door. I've got it, he called out. I followed him slowly, staying in the hallway. It was Mr. Henderson from next door. He was 70, with deep, weathered wrinkles across his cheeks and a temperament that usually leaned toward grumpy. But today, he looked genuinely annoyed. He was holding a clipboard with a printed schedule on it. Hector, Mr. Henderson said, not bothering with a greeting. I've called the rental place twice. They said the hedge trimmer was never confirmed for Monday. I can't have the crew coming out if the equipment isn't here. We agreed on the split for the south fence line 3 weeks ago. Hector blinked. He put on that look of vague confidence he always uses when he's winging it. Right. The trimmer. I must have missed the confirmation email. I'll handle it right now, Bill. No problem. It's Mr. Henderson, the neighbor corrected him. And it needs to be done by 5 today, or the rental shop is giving the unit to someone else. I told your wife about this last Tuesday. Hector looked back at me, a silent plea for a detail he'd completely ignored. I just stood there, my arms crossed. I knew exactly where the confirmation email was. It was in the shared duplex folder flagged in red, with a note I'd written in the margins that said, "Confirm by Friday." I had mentioned it to him 3 times over the last week, and each time he'd waved a hand and told me he was on top of it. I'll check the email, Hector said, turning back to Mr. Henderson. We'll get it sorted. As soon as the door closed, Hector turned to me. Why didn't you just tell me it was today? You knew he was coming over. I told you 3 times, Hector. I told you on Tuesday, I told you on Thursday. And I told you on Friday morning while you were eating your toast. Well, you didn't tell me it was a hard deadline, he countered. You just mentioned it. There's a difference between a reminder and a deadline. I felt a surge of irritation so strong it felt like a physical heat. The difference is that I'm the one who remembers the deadlines. That's the whole point. I'm the only one who remembers anything in this house, and you just expect it to happen automatically. He sighed, that long, suffering sound he made when he thought I was being difficult. He walked back to the kitchen table and sat down, leaning his head on his hand. Liz, you're spiraling. You're taking a shipping typo and a hedge trimmer and turning a shipping typo into a huge fight about our whole marriage. It's just a bad weekend. We're both stressed. I'm not spiraling, I said. I'm calculating. I'm calculating the cost of your coordination. I'm calculating the 10% of my commission that you gave away to make yourself look like a hero to Sarah. You're just venting, he said, his voice softening into that patronizing, soothing tone. You've had a long week. Why don't you go take a bath or read a book? And I'll handle the rental shop and the email to Sarah to clarify the discount. I looked at him, not with the hope that he'd finally get it, but with the realization that he truly believed my anger was just a mood. To him, my frustration was just a mood to him, something that would blow over if he ignored it long enough. He didn't see the discount as a breach of trust. He saw it as a tactical move that I was too emotional to appreciate. I didn't go take a bath. I went back into the office and opened my laptop. I had until Monday morning to fix the situation with Sarah before the discount became a permanent part of the account's billing cycle. I knew that if I let Hector clarify it, he would just smooth it over in a way that left me as the one who was confused or overreacting about the numbers. I started typing an email to Sarah. I didn't CC Hector. I didn't mention his generosity. I simply stated that there had been a clerical error regarding the pricing for the next 3 orders and that I was attaching the correct invoice. I kept it professional, cold, and entirely my own. As I hit send, I heard the garage remote click. Hector was heading out to the hardware store. Probably to buy something. He didn't need to avoid spending another 10 minutes talking about the hedge trimmer. I sat in the quiet of the house, listening to the distant roll of the coastal storm finally moving in. The rain started to hit the windows in sudden, heavy bursts. I thought about the laundry still damp in the washer and the blue folder on the mudroom floor. I realized that for years, I had been so proud of my competence that I'd spent so long doing everything that he'd just stopped trying. I had made the invisible labor so seamless that he actually believed the house ran itself. I didn't feel like a hero for sending that email. I just felt like a woman who was tired of being the only one who knew where the gaps were and who had finally stopped trying to fill them for him. The storm finally broke on Sunday morning, leaving the air smelling of wet asphalt and salt. I spent most of the day in a state of high alert, waiting for my phone to buzz with a response from Sarah. I'd sent the correction email on Friday, and by Saturday night, the silence felt like a countdown. I didn't tell Hector I'd sent it. I just went about my business, ignoring the damp laundry that had finally started to smell like a swamp in the washer. Hector spent Saturday and Sunday in a strange, tentative mood. He'd managed to secure the hedge trimmer at the last second, after a frantic 30-minute phone call that I could hear from the other room. And he'd spent most of Sunday afternoon actually trimming the south fence line. He worked with a focused, almost aggressive energy, as if the hedge was the thing he was actually angry at. When he came inside around 5, wiping sweat from his forehead with a grimy rag, he looked at me with a tentative sort of hope. "The fence looks great," he said. Henderson actually thanked me. He said it was about time we got it sorted. "I'm sure he did," I said. I was sitting at the small dining table, my laptop open to my commission tracker. "Look, Liz," he started, leaning against the counter. "I know this weekend was bumpy. I think we both just hit a wall. I'm sorry about the trimmer thing. I really did think I had it on the calendar. I didn't look up. The trimmer is a chore, Hector. The discount was a business decision. Did you check your email today?" He paused. I could hear him shifting his weight. "Not since this morning." "Why?" "Because Sarah replied." She was confused. She said she'd already noted the 10% discount in her budget for the next quarter and didn't understand why the invoice had reverted to the original price. Hector sighed, and I could tell he was preparing the relationship management speech again. He walked over to the table and looked at the screen. You just went behind my back and undid it. You made us look disorganized. Now she thinks we can't even agree on a price. We aren't us on this account, I said, finally looking at him. It's my account. It's my professional reputation and my paycheck. You decided to use my money to buy yourself some goodwill. That isn't coordination, Hector. That's a theft of my labor and my earnings. He didn't move for a long time. He just stared at the screen, his face tightening. For a few seconds, I thought he was going to walk away or tell me I was being dramatic again. But the silence stretched too long to be a dodge. I didn't want to ask you, he said, his voice low and flat. I knew you'd say no. You always have a reason why we can't do things the easy way. Or why the numbers don't work. I just wanted to fix the mistake I made with the zip code without having to have another long conversation about how I messed up. Hector Rodriguez admitted he had given the discount without asking me because he didn't want to deal with the fallout of his own error. I felt a strange, cold hollow in my chest. It wasn't a victory. Knowing that he'd consciously chosen to deceive me rather than face a difficult conversation didn't make me feel powerful. It just made me feel lonely in my own house. So the solution to you making a mistake was to make another one that cost me money, I said. It wasn't a mistake. It was a strategy, he countered, though the confidence was gone from his voice. It was a shortcut, I corrected him. We sat there in the humid quiet of the kitchen for a while. I realized then that I'd played my part in this too. I thought about all the times I'd made a little joke about how I was the chief reminder officer, or how I wondered if the house would simply float away if I stopped paying the bills. I'd used sarcasm as a way to signal my exhaustion because it felt safer than actually demanding a change. Hinting was easier than risking a direct answer that might have been a no, or a I don't care. I'd spent years pretending that my competence was a gift I gave the family, when really, it was a shield I used to avoid the vulnerability of asking for help and being denied. I can't do the invisible stuff anymore, Hector, I said. I can't be the only one who knows where the gaps are. It's making me resent you. And I don't want to do that. What do you want me to do? He asked. He sounded tired, not defeated, but genuinely worn out. I want a hard handoff, I said. No more I'll handle it, unless there is a date, a time, and a confirmation email that I can see. And you're taking over the duplex lease and the property taxes. Entirely. From the first notice to the final payment. If a late fee happens, it comes out of your spending money, not the joint account. He frowned. The taxes? I don't even know where the login is. It's in the blue folder, I said. The one you found on the floor. He didn't argue. He didn't tell me I was being unfair. He just nodded slowly. Fine, I'll do the taxes and the lease. It was a small measurable change. It wasn't a total restructuring of our marriage. And it didn't magically erase the fact that he'd tried to play the hero with my commission. I knew that trust wouldn't come back just because he was now responsible for a few government forms. He'd still likely forget a deadline or misplace a document, and the impulse to smooth things over with a shortcut was still there, buried in his personality. Monday morning came with a lingering haze of humidity. I was back at my desk, finishing a report for the Wilmington account. I'd managed to smooth things over with Sarah by framing the discount as a one-time introductory credit that had been applied prematurely, and she'd accepted it, though the warmth in her emails had cooled slightly. Around noon, my phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text from Hector. Rental place says the trimmer is returned. Did you see the email about the water bill? I think it's higher than usual. I looked at the phone, then looked at the stack of invoices I still had to process. I remembered the feeling of spending my lunch hour on hold with a courier in Dover, the distorted jazz and the feeling of being erased. I didn't pick up the phone. I didn't reply. I just left the message sitting there, unanswered, while I focused on the work in front of me, letting him sit with the uncertainty of the water bill for as long as he needed to. By late August, the humidity in Rehoboth had shifted from a wet blanket to a heavy, oppressive steam that made the paint on the duplex porch peel in long, curling strips. I was back in my rhythm at work, managing the fall inventory and keeping a very close eye on my margins. I'd stopped checking the shared duplex email account entirely. It was a strange feeling, like I'd stepped off a treadmill I'd been running on for 2 decades. My shoulders felt lighter, but there was a lingering anxiety, a phantom itch, that told me something was probably sliding toward a cliff somewhere in our household. Everything held up until the second week of September. I was in the middle of a conference call with a vendor from Ohio when I saw Hector walk into the kitchen. He didn't look at me, but he was hovering. He had that specific, restless energy he gets when he's trying to figure out a puzzle, but doesn't want to admit he's lost the instructions. He was holding a piece of mail, a bright yellow notice from the county. I muted my microphone and leaned back in my chair. I didn't say anything. I just watched him. "Liz," he whispered, leaning toward me. "Did you see this? The property tax installment. It says it was due on the 1st. There's a penalty." I looked at the yellow paper. I didn't reach for it. I didn't see it. "You're handling the taxes now, remember?" He blinked, his expression sliding into that look of mild confusion he used whenever he encountered a boundary he'd forgotten he'd agreed to. "Right. I know, but I thought maybe you'd put a reminder on your phone." "You usually do that. I just wanted to check if you'd already sent the check and the county just hasn't processed it yet." It was the old hook. He wasn't asking me to take over. He was asking me to provide the invisible safety net, the mental backup system that ensured he never actually had to feel the consequence of a mistake. He wanted me to be the one to verify the error, to call the county, to just check the records. "I didn't put a reminder on my phone, Hector," I said, my voice flat and quiet. "That's your job now. You have the login in the blue folder." "I did. I got caught up with a new case at the office. This veteran is having a real crisis with his housing voucher, and it's been eating my whole week." In the past, this is where I would have sighed and taken the paper from him. I would have said, "It's okay, I know you're stressed." And I would have spent my evening on hold with the tax office, fixing the problem, and then feeling a simmering, silent resentment for the next 3 days. I would have made a joke about how I was the only person in the house who knew how to read a calendar, and he would have laughed and told me he didn't know what he'd do without me. Instead, I unmuted my microphone. "Sorry, I'm still here," I told the vendor. "Go ahead with the shipping specs." Hector stood there for a moment, the yellow notice still in his hand. He looked genuinely stuck. He wanted the problem to vanish, and he wanted me to be the magic wand. When he realized I wasn't moving, he let out a short, frustrated huff and walked back into the mudroom. I heard him rummaging through the blue folder, the sound of papers sliding and a drawer slamming. He didn't come back into the kitchen for an hour. When he finally did, he looked tired, but he wasn't hovering anymore. "I paid it," he said, "including the late fee." "Good," I said, not looking up from my screen. "It was $42, he added, his voice sounding a bit pinched. "That's the cost of the coordination," I replied. He didn't argue. He didn't tell me I was being dramatic, or that I was spiraling. He just went to the sink and started washing his hands. It was a small victory, but it felt concrete. He had felt the pinch of the late fee, not just the money, but the annoyance of having to resolve a failure without a buffer. We didn't have a big emotional breakthrough after that. There was no cinematic moment where we held hands and promised to be a new version of ourselves. We just continued. He kept handling the taxes and the lease, and I kept my hands off them, even when I noticed he'd filed a document in the wrong tab of the digital folder. I stopped using the dry jokes to signal my burnout. When I was tired, I just said, "I'm tired, and I can't help you with that right now." It changed the air in the house. Some of the tension left, but it was replaced by a different kind of distance. I realized that for years, my competence had been a bridge that allowed him to avoid the hard parts of our shared life. Now that the bridge was gone, he had to learn how to swim, and I had to learn how to watch him struggle without jumping in to save him. It was lonely, in a way. I missed the feeling of being the indispensable one, the one who held all the secrets to how the world worked, but I missed the exhaustion more. One evening, as we were sitting on the porch watching the beach traffic clog up the main road, Hector reached over and squeezed my hand. "I'm still not great at the folder thing," he admitted. "I keep losing the password for the portal." "I know," I said. "But I'm doing it," he said. You are, I agreed. I looked at him and felt a flicker of something like affection, but it was tempered by a lingering caution. I knew he still had the impulse to take the shortcut. And I knew that if I let my guard down, the invisible labor would start to seep back into my day like a slow leak in a pipe. Trust wasn't something that came back in a single payment. It was more like a long-term loan with a very slow interest rate. I didn't tell him that. I just leaned my head on his shoulder and watched the cars crawl by, feeling the strange, quiet peace of knowing that for the first time in 20 years, the gaps in our life were his to fill.